Good afternoon, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the side event on Joining Forces, how MEAs drive compliance and enforcement against illegal trade. The first side event to take place here in the MEA Pavilion since its opening. My name is Yvonne Higuero. I am the Secretary General of the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species of Wild Fauna and Flora, or CITES, a little bit easier. The side event is jointly organized by the Secretariat of CITES, Secretariat of the Basel, Rotterdam, and Stockholm Conventions, the Secretariat of the Minamata Convention, the Secretariat of the Montreal Protocol, and UNEP. I wish to thank my colleagues from the MEA Secretariats and UNEP for coming together today, and to all of you for joining us at this side event. I know there's a lot of competition for other events, but I'm really happy to see that we have a pretty full room. Following the interventions by the panelists, we will have a question and answer session, and I do hope that you will participate and contribute to the discussions. Now, let me set the scene for our exchanges. Across the globe, a number of MEAs rely on trade control provisions as a central means to achieve their objectives. Yet, the illegal trade of environmentally sensitive substances and commodities, ranging from ozone-depleting substances and mercury to hazardous and other wastes to endangered species, continues to pose serious threats to human health, ecosystems, economies, and security. These illegal activities undermine national efforts as well as the collective progress made under the multilateral environmental agreements. MEAs with trade control measures therefore play a vital role in regulating international trade and in preventing and combating illegal traffic. Strengthening their compliance and enforcement systems is essential to advancing sustainable solutions for a resilient planet in line with the theme of UNEP 7. This side event sets out to highlight the critical contribution of MEAs and their compliance committees in assisting parties to ensure that international trade occurs in an environmentally sound manner and that illegal trade is effectively prevented, detected, and addressed. The side event will also underline the indispensable role of national enforcement agencies, particularly customs and border authorities, as the first line of defense against this illegal traffic. Participants will be introduced to new tools and activities developed by MEA secretariats and international partners such as UNEP to enhance monitoring, detection, and enforcement at borders. The event will showcase concrete examples and best practices for coordinated national implementation to strengthen trade control and combat illegal traffic. It is now my great pleasure to invite our opening speakers. First, let me introduce Ms. Meg Secchi, Executive Secretary of the Ozone Secretariat. Her work on ozone layer issues started in 1988. Ms. Secchi has worked in various parts of UNEP, including in the team that prepared the first two issues of the Global Environment Outlook, and as Chief of Atmosphere and Desertification Conventions Unit on Climate and Desertification Conventions, Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. At the Ozone Secretariat, she was Senior Scientific Officer and Deputy Executive Secretary before becoming Executive Secretary. I invite my very good friend Meg Secchi to come here for her opening remarks.
Thank you very much, Yvonne, for that very kind introduction. Good afternoon, everybody. Let me try to be brief so that I am not taking time away from the substantive discussions to be held by the panelists. So they will be discussing the details on the matter, including on the Montreal Protocol, which will be presented by Pablo, sitting over there. He is the Senior Legal Officer of the Ozone Secretariat. So, illegal trade has been a key issue under the Montreal Protocol for many years, starting in the early 1990s, when the problem first arose. This was a couple of years after the entry into force of the Montreal Protocol, even before the controlled substances became scarce because of the reduction and the phase-out under the Montreal Protocol. So it was quite clear that illegal trade in controlled substances could jeopardize the objectives of the protocol to phase out ozone-depleting substances. In those early days, the focus was on establishment of licensing systems and quota systems to control the trade and on measures to prevent illegal trade, which is not actually defined under the protocol, but understood to mean any unauthorized imports or exports as defined under domestic law. The parties to the protocol, in their decisions over the years, have also emphasized the importance of reporting cases of illegal trade to the Secretariat, sharing information on enforcement actions and known cases of illegal production, and facilitating the exchange of information among parties. While voluntary reporting on illegal trade has increased, the full scale of such trade remains uncertain, and information on such cases being reported is likely to be not as many as there are such cases. So 4 weeks ago, we had our 37th MOP, and just before the MOP, we had an informal meeting, which was convened on facilitating implementation of the Montreal Protocol. We had great inputs from the BRS Secretariat, the Multilateral Fund, and its implementing agencies, including UNEP, UNDP, UNIDO, and the World Bank. Discussions focus very much on issues of illegal trade, licensing systems, how to strengthen reporting systems, and capacity and enhancement across the board. Parties reiterated the need and requirements, including effective legislation and regulatory frameworks, addressing domestic trade, e-commerce platforms, and marketplaces, development of standard operating procedures, or SOPs, as a key measure in fighting illegal trade, and strengthening interagency cooperation, for example, between national ozone units and customs. Parties also pointed to the need to further promote the informal prior informed consent procedures used by many parties already to the Montreal Protocol, and they also touched on trade-related issues such as free trade zones, transshipment, and re-export. For all these trade-related issues, strong enforcement is also key. So today's event will make a strong contributions to the MEAs trying to work together on this illegal trade issue, and I also look forward to sharing with the parties insights coming from this event. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Meg. And it's amazing how much crossover there is about the themes, even with conventions that are entirely dealing with different subjects. It's very interesting. I think we'll hear more and more about that. Now I'd like to introduce Mr. Rolf Payet, the Executive Secretary of the Basel, Rotterdam, and Stockholm Conventions. Rolf has served as Executive Secretary of the Basel, Rotterdam, and Stockholm Conventions since 2014, leading global efforts to manage hazardous chemicals and waste responsibly. Mr. Payet's career spans academia, government, and international diplomacy. As former Seychelles Minister for Environment and Energy, he led major initiatives in conservation and renewable energy, shaping Seychelles' sustainable development. He also founded Seychelles' first university, launched the world's first ocean blue bond, and established the Global Island Partnership. His interdisciplinary leadership continues to shape international efforts on chemicals, waste, climate, and biodiversity. Rolf, I welcome you to the stage.
Thank you so much, Yvonne, for this detailed CV. Colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. I always start my remarks with an illustration. And I know many of you have had a house where you've had a water leak, or you come after a holiday and the house is flooded and you're trying to identify where the water leak is. Illegal trade are leaks across our borders. We have people who take advantage for our lack of capacity to manage our borders, and they take advantage of this to try and move around illegal activities. We also know, I mean, especially since I come from a small country, that the customs officer or the police officer is not an expert in chemicals, nor in endangered species, nor in refrigeration equipment, and so on. So working with them is a priority because they are the front lines. We sit in the convention secretariat and our focal point sits in the different ministries, but they are the ones who are actually every single day dealing with the complex products, waste, and so on that is crossing our borders, either illegally or legally. So working together is something that we need to do. It is not an option. And I'm so happy we have the executive secretaries here from all the major conventions that have trade-related aspects. And I'm so happy we're working together with UNEP, with the Green Customs Initiative, to really reinforce, closing the net, so to speak, identifying those leaks, and having a nice dry home called planet Earth for us to live on. So the effectiveness of these efforts are very important and fundamental. MEAs, as you know, provide this solid international foundation for us to operate. It brings together countries, which we call parties, and they sign on and they commit themselves to addressing those global challenges, whether it's illegal dumping of waste, whether it's illegal movement of refrigerators, ozone depleting substances, endangered species, and so on. But when they commit, they suddenly realize that they need to have the capacity, both in situ, but also between themselves. And that brings me to a situation which I had when I was minister. I got a call that there was a shipment. We had a species listed on the CITES, and this shipment was making its way to Singapore. And luckily, I had the contact address of the customs and the focal point in Singapore for CITES. And we were able to intercept. But that's only one. We need colleagues to develop the capacity, but also the network. And we need to make it work. Meg mention of the prior informed consent. And this is a very strong mechanism that we share between our convention. But we've always had challenges on how to implement it, how to make it effective, and how to make it work. And I always have these wonderful illustrations because I sometimes try to reverse our thinking. When we order an Amazon package, whether it comes from China or from wherever, it ends up on our doorstep because we have a global tracking system. It's in the interest of Amazon.com to ensure that this package reaches the customers. But we keep failing the other way around. When we generate the waste, the tracking system seems not to work. And I keep asking myself the question, why can't it work in reverse? Why, when a company wants to dispose of computers and secures a proper recycling company in another country to dispose of it, we see it ending up in another country, in a dump site, where we have kids, we have women trying to extract gold from these computers. This is the situation we are living in today. All the efforts that parties are putting together, they are exploiting weaknesses into our system to try and bypass the efforts we are doing to address those global challenges. So, as you know, it was only at the last COP, well, the COP previous, that we finally adopted the compliance mechanism for the Stockholm Convention. And when I joined the Secretariat, this was one of my milestones I wanted to achieve. And I'm so happy we managed to achieve it after 15 years of negotiations. For me, it was the third leg of a stool, because a convention without a compliance mechanism is a convention that will be hobbling along. You get what I mean? It will never be fully implementable, because compliance, I know countries sometimes see it as a police activity. It is not a police activity. It is an effort to support countries, to identify their needs, to identify gaps, to identify weaknesses, and to support countries and parties to address those weaknesses. So we start closing those water leaks, removing the floods that we have in our planet Earth. I won't speak a lot. Yvonne knows I will talk until tomorrow morning, but I want the panel here to engage you. But I'm really, really happy to be here this afternoon to really engage and continue to grow this cooperation. And I hope I've touched on some of the important areas of work and why we need each other, why we need UNEP, the Green Customs Initiative, why we need the different MEAs to work together, and why we need to build strong, resilient compliance committees, but also the people in the front lines, the customs officers, the police, the people working through the different networks that help support and to help close those leaks. And you can count on the BRS Secretariat to continue sharing its experience, sharing its expertise. And mind you, it's not easy, because we're dealing with very complex issues. But I think if we work together, we can make a lot of progress. So those few words, thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to say a few words.
Thank you so much, Rolf, and congratulations on the compliance mechanism that was established. And I can only echo your words about the importance of the customs authorities who are on the front lines. When we talk about endangered species, for example, and similar to chemicals and substances that are, and finished products, it's very difficult for them to understand, is this something that should be allowed to pass through the borders? Is this for CITES species in particular? Does this need a permit? It's a finished piece of furniture. I'm not sure what tree this has been built with. I have to learn through identification materials how to recognize it. It's a lot of work for the customs authorities, so we need them on our side. Thank you so much for those words. Now we're going to go ahead and start with the discussions, the panel discussion. Yes, I learned that from the COP. We have to press, we just finished our COP and I learned that we have to press the microphone for a long time to be able to get it to work. So thank you so much, and we're going to then start with the discussions of the panel. And I'm again very grateful for all of you to take your time to be here and join us for this panel discussion, this side event. And first I would like to introduce Dr. Sonja Dunvald. She is here on behalf of the Basel Convention Implementation and Compliance Committee. She is a policy officer and legal advisor in the international section of the German Federal Ministry for the Environment. Ms. Dunvald focuses on issues of public international law and advises her government in different international environmental processes. She has served as a member of the Basel Implementation and Compliance Committee since 2023. Ms. Dunvald also holds a master's degree and PhD in public international law, and prior to joining the public service, Ms. Dunvald worked as dispute resolution lawyer in private practice in Frankfurt and Paris. So you have a lot of, a very big expertise and background to be on this panel, and I would like to ask you a couple of questions. The first question is, how does the Basel Convention Implementation and Compliance Committee, also known as the ICC, assist parties in preventing and penalizing illegal traffic in hazardous and other wastes?
Thank you very much for the nice introduction and for having me on this stage. And I would first like to say a few general words about the Basel Implementation and Compliance Committee. It was established in 2002, and it has the mandate to assist parties in implementing their obligations under the Basel Convention. It is a subsidiary organ of the Convention of the Parties, and the idea is that the Compliance Committee looks at issues, then makes recommendations, and that the Conference of the Parties finally decides to adopt recommendations or other measures. More specifically, the committee has two ways of looking at issues. One is to assist individual parties, and the other is to look at general issues that come up in the implementation. And with regard to illegal traffic that we talk about today, it is only the second option that has really been used. So more specifically, the idea is to identify challenges, well, using two different methods. The first one is to undertake a scoping exercise of the national reports that have been done to identify traffic routes and also waste streams that have been trafficked. And the second is to assess the extent to which parties have really implemented the obligations because under the convention, because the idea is obviously if the national legislation does not work, they cannot fulfill their obligations sufficiently. And these assessments by the committees have been done over quite some time, and several recommendations have been handed to the COP, so the Conference of the Parties of the Basel Convention, and several measures have been adopted. So one of them is ENFORCE. That's a nice acronym for the Environmental Network for Optimizing Regulatory Compliance on Illegal Traffic. And it is a network that brings together experts and also regional centers that deal with the convention, so that capacity building can really take place. Then there is also guidance that the implementation committee develops. And there is obviously, we do that on several issues, but there is one very specifically on illegal traffic as well. And then there are other, maybe a bit more technical aspects that have been adopted by the conference following the advice from the compliance committee, and they regulate templates for coordinating mechanisms so that enforcement agencies and other players can work together. And the last thing that I would like to mention is that there is a specific questionnaire for state parties to report on cases of illegal traffic, and this has also been updated and made a bit better because some parties had problems filling it in properly. So this is a bit of a run through all the elements, and I hope that answers it.
Yes, it does, and I think this is working now, so you can keep the microphone for the second question. I think this is interesting to see how you handle compliance cases under Basel, and I'd like to particularly underline what you mentioned about capacity building, that I think that's very important to assist the parties in being able to understand how to stop, to fight this crime, and to do better in the future. So I think this is something to underline under Basel. So the second question is about what trends or challenges are emerging, and where is enhanced cooperation most needed?
Yes, so I've already mentioned the scoping exercise that is being undertaken, where we look at national reporting, so national reports in that regard, and we do a report on that, and this really gives us some idea about the trends that are emerging. And I would just like to name a few that, hopefully are quite illustrative. So there is a stable number of parties that report cases, of closed cases as we call them, of illegal traffic, and these are around 25 to 30%, so that's kind of stable throughout the years. In absolute numbers, it sounds very big. It's between 1,300 or 1,700 cases in a year. That sounds a lot, but it is important to note that not all of those cases that have been reported are really cases that would fall, well, that would really be illegal traffic under the convention, but parties also report a lot on national legislations cases or regional legislation cases, which is a lot broader. We can also see the waste streams that are most intensely illegally trafficked, and these are waste and electronic equipment and their parts, end-of-life vehicles and their parts, and then also plastic waste. And yeah, I think these are the main points. We would have to caution the findings a bit, because not all regions report in the same, well, intensity, I would say. So you can't really say which region really has the most cases and which region doesn't. But yeah, I think it gives us a good idea on where to look further and how to continue. And you've also asked me about cooperation. Of course, cooperation can be better and enhanced at all levels. So that is at a national level, where the competent authorities can work together better with the enforcement agencies. Another level that is also important for the Basel Convention is all different states that are involved. So the exporting state, the importing state, and the transitional state, so where it passes through. And if all of them together, you can really see and make sure that the obligations and the prior informed consent proceedings are really respected. And the last level, of course, is probably the case for also a lot of the other colleagues here, is the international level, the MEAs and other international elements. If they work together, it is great to help parties fulfill their obligations, to assist in capacity building, and also to keep this topic at the international agenda.
Very good. Thank you so much. And I think a thread that runs through this is the issue of communication and sharing information amongst the different authorities, and also across borders. That seems to be a very important issue of cooperation and sharing intelligence. And the fact that at the national level, there's a lot of work to be done to be able to make sure that that communication happens. The reporting seems quite high, 25-30%. Probably we can improve that if there was the more. What do you think about those numbers?
So it is of the parties that are reporting,
Yes.
and I think it is, yes, of course, we try to help them more, to see where the issues are, and then give assistance. And obviously the working together also with other agencies is very important. The country support that is given by other entities can also help in that regard. And we hope, but like everything, it's difficult, of course.
One step at a time, I suppose. It's moving forward. Very good. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. Now I'd like to introduce the second panelist. His name is Mr. Pablo Moscoso with the Ozone Secretariat. You are the Senior Legal Officer at the Ozone Secretariat, and before joining the Secretariat in 2024, he worked at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Peru and provided legal advice during the negotiation, ratification, interpretation, and implementation of treaties regarding environmental issues, law of the sea, law of airspace and outer space, interesting, international dispute settlement, among other fields. He was also an international law lecturer. Welcome, Mr. Moscoso. And I'd like to ask you the first question, which is, how do the licensing and reporting systems under the Montreal Protocol support the detection and prevention of illegal trade?
Thank you so much.
You have to press on it.
Thank you. So, thank you so much. And good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for joining us here this afternoon. I'm very happy to be here. And so, regarding this first question, in terms of the licensing systems, under the Montreal Protocol, parties have to establish and implement a system for licensing the import and exports of new use, recycled, and reclaimed controlled substances listed in the various annexes to the Montreal Protocol. And the meetings of the parties to the Montreal Protocol have adopted a number of decisions that clarify how these licensing systems can help in terms of illegal trade. And so the 9th meeting of the parties clarify that these information assist, or these systems assist collection of sufficient information to facilitate parties' compliance with relevant reporting requirements under the protocol, and also help parties to prevent cases of illegal trade of controlled substances, including as appropriate through notification and or regular reporting by exporting countries to importing countries, and or by allowing cross-checking of information. So under the protocol, parties have to report to the Secretariat on the establishment and operation of their licensing systems. However, this obligation doesn't include providing to the Secretariat the details of such systems. Parties do provide information on the details on a voluntary basis, and that information has been very useful for the Secretariat to prepare a number of documents on common features of licensing systems. And so this is one aspect. The establishment of the licensing system, the reporting of the licensing systems, and then in terms of the effectiveness of the system, there have been cases when, in terms of the, in the context of the ozone of the Montreal Protocol, the implementation committee doesn't have the specific role to go into cases of illegal trade specifically. But it does have other powers, and among those, it can check on and review the request from parties to change baseline data. And in this context, it has provided an opportunity to determine and examine how these licensing systems have been effective or not in the past. And so this information is helpful for parties when they continue implementing their obligations under the protocol. And then in terms of data reporting, under the protocol, parties have the obligation to provide to the Secretariat data reports of imports and exports of controlled substances. And they must provide this statistical data to the Secretariat, and a number of also of this data that is reported serves to determine how parties comply with obligations under the protocol. And there are a number of decisions that determine that parties voluntarily can report on the sources of imports and also the destination of exports. And this is on a voluntary basis. But once the Secretariat receives this information can be shared to other parties. And this can help parties to determine whether there have been cases of illegal trade. So we in fact have seen several instances where this information sharing has been quite useful for parties. Yes.
Okay, very good. I think here I was also underlined another thread that seems to go through the conventions, which is the importance of national reporting and being able to get information from this national reporting. Is there a database that you have a database that collects all of this information that comes from the parties?
Yes, indeed. Thank you so much. Yes, we do have an online reporting system, and we receive the information from parties. This information is then processed through the system, and then parties can access the information. Mm-hmm. And also, some of the summaries of this information is publicly available for anyone to look at.
Excellent, excellent. Now, the second question is about what compliance lessons can be shared with other MEAs as we're trying to learn from each other. What can you share with us?
Yes, thank you. So I think that based on all the data that parties report voluntarily to the Secretariat, either on licensing systems, but also on data reporting, we've been able to, the Secretariat has been able to prepare a number of documents on common features of licensing systems, and then also on some good practices in terms of cases of illegal trade And this information has been made available to all parties and is also public. And this, for example, helped during the recent informal meeting on strengthening the Montreal Protocol. So parties had access to this information. So that's an example of how information sharing has been beneficial to all parties.
Excellent. And I think here we can talk, if we talk about good practices, not only within the conventions themselves and the parties of those conventions, but outside, so we can learn from other conventions, can learn from the experiences that you've had. So I would probably encourage my fellow heads of secretariats to see if sometime we can share this kind of practice that you have, so we can see if we can take something on board for ourselves as well. Thank you so much for that, for sharing that with us. So now I come to my dear colleague, Ms. Haruko Kuso, who's the chief of the governing bodies unit in the CITES Secretariat. She has over 25 years of experience in biodiversity governance and international environmental policy. She brings extensive expertise in multilateral processes, including CBD and the Cartagena Protocol on Biosafety, CITES, regional seas, conventions, and action plans. Her work spans policy development, capacity building, resource mobilization, and program management. Currently, she serves as the chief of the governing bodies unit at the Secretariat, where she oversaw the successful organization and delivery of CITES COP20 that just ended on Friday. Prior to her role at CITES, Haruko worked at UNEP headquarters and its regional office for Asia and the Pacific with CGIAR and in academia. So Haruko, welcome. And the first question I have for you is, how do CITES compliance mechanisms help strengthen national enforcement efforts?
Thank you very much. Just as in the case with the two previous speakers, non-compliance with CITES is very much treated as a serious matter for the parties. And this is because CITES deals with trade in wildlife, plants and animals. Non-compliance could lead to not just threats to the species or to the environment, ecosystems that they live in, but also it could affect the country's economies, livelihoods, national security, and it could also undermine different law enforcement activities of these countries, considering that illegal wildlife trade is now considered as the fourth largest illegally traded goods in the world. And when you actually look at CITES, sometimes people call CITES as convention with teeth, and this is because CITES is considered to have a robust compliance mechanism to identify potential compliance challenges and implement and enforcement issues that can be addressed early enough. When you actually look at the how in terms of the characteristics of the compliance mechanism within CITES, there are perhaps 4 different types of characteristics. The first one is that the compliance activities in CITES is considered as a constructive and non-adversarial issues. What this means is that non-compliance within CITES is something not to punish the countries, not punitive measures for the parties, but this is really a way to identify how to assist different parties so that they can implement the applicable rules and procedures so that the convention as a whole can be implemented in a holistic manner through different technical assistance, advisory services, and other means. Of course, if the country actually persists with non-compliance for many, many years and is not seen to be making any progress, these countries may end up with trade suspension, and this is where the teeth part of the convention happens. The second characteristic is that the compliance activities are actually determined with multiple factors. And this shows how compliance is not a very straightforward issue, but it's a very complex matter. So the standing committee of the convention, which determines compliance measures, actually look at different factors, such as the capacity of the party, different nature of the issue, proportionality of the measures against the seriousness of the actual matter at hand, and potential impact of that compliance measure against the conservation and sustainable use of the species of concern. The third characteristic that CITES has in terms of compliance is that there are certain direct avenues in dealing with compliance. The first issue is called the first matter is called the National Legislation Project. And this is a program that has been going on for over 30 years to check and monitor if countries actually do have their national legislation in place that would fulfill the basic requirements of the convention, There are actually 4 pillars of the requirements, 2 of which are law enforcement related. One is to make sure that there are relevant provisions for penalties in violation of the convention. And the 4th one is actually to have provisions that actually allows the authorities to confiscate illegally traded goods that are either seized or discovered during the process. The second avenue could be the Article 13 process. And this process is looking at apparent systemic or structural issues, including irregularities in law enforcement actions with regard to wildlife trade. The third one is called the National Ivory Action Plan. And this is a process that looks at countries that are affected by the illegal wildlife trade in elephant ivory and sometimes rhino horns as well. And the last one is called the Review of Significant Trade, which is a science-driven compliance measures that looks at apparent irregularities in the sustainability determination of certain species. And this could actually lead to countries being required to improve and show what their management measures are. Now, the last characteristic about the compliance issues with CITES is that we do have a compliance action program. It's called CAP. And this is actually modeled after the ozone cap program. And this is something, again, that we can talk about in terms of synergies, that we actually modeled our compliance action program after the ozone cap program to look at parties address some basic issues, especially if they have multiple and recurring long-term compliance challenges. And we heard a little bit about the leak, non-compliance is a leak or illegal trade is a leak. And these are cases when the leakage is so bad that you actually need to not just to plug the hole, but look at the actual source of the leakage. And these are actually measures, support mechanisms that will bring different elements in the country, different entities of the country to come together. So management authorities, scientific authorities, customs people, law enforcement authorities, others, including traders or the judiciary, to tackle the underlying issue that is addressing the compliance matters, so that together the country can actually go towards compliance on these multiple elements.
Very good, thank you very much. And yes, I think I'd like to underline here also for CITES about the carrot and the stick, and we like to use the carrot more than we like to use the stick, but that sometimes it is as the ultimate compliance measure that has to be taken, which is trade suspension, and that makes the convention quite strong. But it is always with the interest of assisting the party to make sure that they can be in compliance with the convention. Now, briefly, could you give us a few words about, now that the COP20 has concluded, what are the most important decisions that were taken there related to the fight against illegal trade in endangered species?
Thank you. I know we're still unpacking a lot of the outcomes from the COP, but law enforcement and addressing wildlife crime has also featured yet again as one of the very important discussions at COP20. First of all, there has been some progress seen in terms of the fight against the illegal wildlife trade. So parties' law enforcement efforts has really seen and yielded some result in terms of, for example, decrease in trafficking incidents of elephant ivory and rhino horns. And this is a good news. However, there are still challenges that persist and continues. So strengthened national and international efforts are still going to be required to address this, especially to make sure that the illegal wildlife trade is seen as a serious crime at that country level, and also to make sure that there's collaboration inside the countries as well as between the countries, especially among the police, customs officers, judiciary, the prosecutors, with the national wildlife authorities. Now, when we're looking at the COP20, the specific focus in terms of what law enforcement activities were multifold. First of all, there was a bit of a focus on wildlife linked to the internet, where there has been a call for better implementation of the guidance that was developed recently by Interpol that deals with how to tackle illegal wildlife trade on the internet. Also, there has been a study on how social media is being used to sell and buy illegally traded wildlife products, and also to work with internet service providers to make sure that these illegal sites are actually detected, reported, and shut down as early as possible. There's also has been some reporting on addressing illicit financial flows and combating corruption, increased call to make sure that parties actually do submit their annual illegal trade reports. And again, echoing some of the reporting importance of reporting from the previous speakers. And also calls for continuation or new CITES enforcement task force, especially on the big cats, tree species, and on great apes. So these are task forces of different countries that would get together and see how enforcement activities can be strengthened. In terms of species-specific enforcement activities, there has been calls by parties on totoaba, rhinos, trees, pangolins, cheetahs, Asian big cats, tortoises and freshwater turtles, and great apes. And lastly, and but not least, I do see my colleague from UNODC here, there has been a continued important role of the International Consortium on Combating Wildlife Crime, also known as IQWIC, and to make sure that using IQWIC services to strengthen the response at national and international levels. And for those who don't know IQWIC, it's a consortium that consists of the World Bank, the World Customs Organization, Interpol, UN Office for Drugs and Crime, and CITES, in order to use the different expertise that these organizations have in tackling illegal and crime-related activities of different types to apply that to illegal wildlife trade.
Very good. Thanks so much. And we look forward to this next intersessional period and the implementation of all these decisions of the 185 parties of CITES. Thank you. Now I turn to the next speaker, Ms. Amy Frankel, who is the Executive Secretary of the Convention on the Conservation of Migratory Species of Wild Animals. Sorry, some things here. She is the Executive Secretary of the Convention on the Conservation of Migratory Species, or CMS, and has over 30 years of experience in international environmental law and policy. Before joining CMS, she headed the Division on Mainstreaming, Cooperation, and Outreach of the Secretariat of the CBD. And before that, she served as the Director of the UNEP Regional Office for North America. Prior to joining the United Nations, Ms. Frankel was Senior Counsel of the Oceans, Atmosphere, Fisheries and Coast Guard Subcommittee of the U.S. Senate Committee on Commerce, Science, and Transportation, working on legislation related to climate change, fisheries, endangered species, ocean and coastal ecosystems, and maritime issues. Welcome, Amy. Some guiding questions for you. The first one, how does illegal trade affect migratory species?
Thank you very much, Yvonne, and it's really a pleasure to join colleagues on this panel. Hello? Yeah.
Is there another one?
Thanks. Test. Hello? Yes,
Yep.
thanks. I was going to say I'm very glad to be joining this panel as a very clear demonstration of how we can build synergies, because CMS does not have trade control measures. However, CMS is very relevant to this discussion. First, illegal trade is a major concern for CMS species, particularly if there is illegal trade in species listed under CMS Appendix 1, which is aimed at species which are endangered or critically endangered. There's approximately 500 species that are listed under both CMS and CITES, and our distinct but complementary measures or mandates are very important for effectively addressing illegal trade. So while we do not regulate international trade, CMS has a legally binding prohibition against the taking of species that are listed on Appendix 1, with several specific exemptions. It's very important to enforce this take prohibition as part of the solution against illegal trade, because all international trade of animals taken from the wild originates, including from the oceans, originates with taking within a country. So if we address the illegal taking, it will have a direct relevance to address illegal trade. At our COP12, CMS also adopted a mechanism to address violations of taking and related provisions under the convention. We're also working with enforcement authorities at the national level for issues, for example, on illegal killing of birds, which is a widespread problem around the world. We started with task forces in the Caribbean, sorry, in the Caribbean, I've got Caribbean in my mind, in the Mediterranean, another ocean, and now have those in 3 parts of the world. We really need a more holistic approach to addressing the whole chain of from taking to trade, and to ensure that there's sustainable use of wildlife and legal use. A couple of examples. First, the reasons for taking is not always predetermined, and individual species or specimens that are taken could end up in international trade or domestic use or both. For some CMS species, the pressures are greater from taking that is driven by purely domestic uses, such as the example I was referring to, illegal killing of birds for sport, or use of wild meat for food or domestic sale, or retaliation for human-wildlife conflict. But the portion of CMS species that are traded in international trade is very significant in terms of the pressure. Finally, if CITES listed species are illegally taken under CMS, it obviously has a direct implication for the ability to trade such species legally. So we really have to look across the 2 treaties, I think, more about the mandate that CMS has within the country on the taking side, all the way through the wonderful mechanisms that CITES has on the international trade side. So, for example, if there can be issues, well, a flip side issue is if there is a species listed under CMS Appendix 1, but it's not listed under CITES, or it's listed under CITES Appendix 2. That means that there could be trade going on that could undermine the taking prohibition of CMS. So again, I'm giving you some examples so you see how the treaties really are intertwined. A final point, at CITES COP20, we were really pleased to see some language adopted, at least in the context of trade in sharks and rays, that called for information to be provided to CITES national management authorities on CMS Appendix 1 listings, and that the management authorities take those into account when deciding whether to issue permits. So it was a very welcome tool to help, again, bridge that information gap and bring our efforts together.
Very good. Thanks so much for talking about synergies, also about the domestic aspects of trade and illegal trade, because many of the countries, it's not only international laws, but it's also the domestic laws that have to be respected in terms of with what we call the taking species from the wild, the fact that sometimes they, as you say, are used domestically, but they can also be mixed in with those that are going to be traded internationally. So there's could be some laundering going on as well in those cases. So thanks for sharing that. And how is the CMS review mechanism relevant to addressing illegal trade?
Okay, very briefly, and I alluded to that already. That was what was adopted at our COP12. Essentially, it's the same idea and philosophy as CITES, which is it's carrot and stick. And the idea is to have a mechanism that will bring countries into compliance and to work with them. So first, this is linked. We have a national legislation program, which is confidential. We have over 70 countries, I think, that have already participating in this, where we look at their national legislation to see if it's implementing CMS fully. And if it's not, we give them a report and we analyze and then offer to help to address any gaps. The review mechanism is the next piece of that, which is if there is a concern about a non-compliance issue, particularly related to Appendix 1 species and taking, that process can be triggered by the Secretariat, by a party, or even an NGO that says we're concerned about something going on. And I won't describe all the steps, but the very first steps are to go to the country, to find out information about what's happening, to try to solve this in a collaborative way. But this can go all the way to a case, and then if it does, we have a lot of procedural steps, and ultimately our standing committee will act as a review body to look at this. So we are, in fact, now looking at, we're strengthening this measure to, if needed, to have compliance cases, and then if there's a finding that there is a non-compliance situation, then there's recommendations that go to the country, which again are meant to be collaborative and not punitive. So I just want to wrap up by saying I really think there's much more that CITES and CMS can do together with both of our complementary mechanisms through sharing of data, Sometimes species might pop up in trade data that we think are CMS species, but there could be anomalies in the nomenclature of the species name. So we already have mandates to fix those issues. So essentially, exchanging information, making sure that national authorities have everything they need to have a really seamless approach in their legislation and enforcement, from the taking, management, permitting, all the way up through international trade, is something where I think we can really work well together. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Amy. Indeed, I think that we can also refer to the work that needs to be done at the national level between the different authorities to communicate with each other and make sure that they're sharing information. So this is a very important point. And the synergies also on national legislation. I know we have worked together previously on issues of national legislation. So thanks very much. And now I turn to panelist 5, last but not least, Mr. Alvin Gachier, Legal Officer of the Law Division of UNEP. You have been specializing in legal action on climate change, pollution, and nature laws. Mr. Gachier provides technical legal assistance to governments, supporting the development and implementation of international environmental law. He serves on the Secretariat of the Green Customs Initiative, a partnership of international entities that enhances capacity of customs to prevent illegal trade in environmentally sensitive commodities. Mr. Gachier, my first question to you: how does the Green Customs Initiative build the capacity of customs officers to prevent illegal trade of commodities covered by MEAs?
Thank you for the question, and thank you for everyone for having attended this event. And first I'll start with explaining just briefly what the Green Customs Initiative is. And it's an initiative which started in 2004, and it involves a number of multilateral environmental agreements, the ones that are seated here, as well as some intergovernmental organizations and some UN agencies. We have UNODC, for example, World Customs Organization, UNEP, and others. And the aim of it is to strengthen the capacities of customs officers who operate at the national level and at the ports of entry and exit, where we see these multilateral environmental agreements coming to life. So we consider that the GCI translates these obligations in multilateral environmental agreements at these ports of entry and exit. Now, they're not all MEAs that we concern ourselves with, and this is because there's over 500 multilateral environmental agreements, but specifically these that have a specific trade-related provisions on environmentally sensitive commodities. Now, we speak about the ozone-depleting substances and HFCs, for example, under the Montreal Protocol. We have some of the environmentally sensitive products, like we have under CITES and its annexes. We have under the Basel, Rotterdam, and Stockholm Convention, specifically with regards to waste. We also have the Minamata Convention that is part of the Green Customs Initiative, and with which we work with, which then would be looking at mercury and its movements. And so we look at these ODSs, HFCs, toxic chemicals, and endangered species at the international level. Now, while at the international level we have these legal instruments, it would be challenging to have enforcement if we did not have, at the national level, customs officers who, one, know what is covered under these multilateral environmental agreements and have the required capacities to, one, if it's stopping the shipments, or if it's knowing, first of all, in terms of identification of what is or could be in some of these shipments, if they don't have the correct systems to store or to dispose of such materials that could then again re-enter the environment. So we then are focused on building the capacity of these customs officers at the national level, but also at the international level together with partners. And so through these GCI-supported products, which we have like reference guides or risk profile tools, then we can support customs officers to be more familiar with MEA terminology and also what to look out for in these shipments. And how do we do this? We do this through supporting training and capacity building, and especially joint capacity building. We promote this in a way that we can have shared expertise between the customs officers on areas like controlled goods, on risk indicators, smuggled trends, and detection techniques. And these trainings then help these customs officers to institutionalize MEA enforcement inside customs administrations. And it also then helps the customs officers at the national level to adopt through their customs administration such risk-based approaches and profiling systems, which then are tailored to environmentally sensitive commodities. And the aim is to improve the efficiency and the targeting of inspections. So then not only relying on randomized checks. So we also work with customs officers so that we can have an enabled, coordinated enforcement and global cooperation. And this is because then at the GCI, or Green Customs Initiative, we don't look at it as only training, but then it's a global partnership, which then incorporates the different MEA secretariats and these enforcement bodies and intergovernmental organizations to foster this cross-border cooperation, intelligence sharing, and harmonized practices. And this then can help to strengthen the legal and operational framework within which these customs officers act. Over the years, we see illicit trade patterns which are increasingly evolving, and there are different routes, the shifting routes are there. There's use of transit and concealment. And so through the GCI, we then ensure that custom officers are kept up to date with these trends. And for example, if there are any additions or amendments to some of the treaties, then we provide such information to the customs officers. In terms of the demonstrated results, we work with organizations like the Green Customs Initiative with the World Customs Organization and partners on an operation, for example, Operation Demeter. Now, Operation Demeter is an operation which targets a seizure of ozone-depleting substances and HFCs and waste under the Basel Convention, Basel, Rotterdam, and Stockholm Convention, as well as then with the Montreal Protocol. And in Operation Demeter, the 10th in 2024, according to official data by the World Customs Organization, this resulted in 450 seizures across 110 participating customs administrations. Now, this is just a short period during which the over 100 customs, countries and customs administrations work together to target a specific category of environmentally sensitive products in these countries. But this just serves to show that when there's then collaboration between the multilateral environmental agreements on a specific task, noting that they have distinct mandates, they have very separate commodities or products that they deal with, but through this concerted effort by the customs officers at the national level and also augmented by the trainings at the international level, we can then drive towards the implementation and enforcement of multilateral environmental agreements. Thank you.
Thank you, and I think you're doing a great job. When I visit the customs administrations, I see how the issue of environmental crime has risen in their agenda, that they understand the importance and how they have to work very hard to be able to stop this crime. And what you're saying about the trends that happen, they have to keep 2 steps ahead of the criminals to be able to make sure they keep up to date with those trends. Thank you so much. And finally, how can cooperation between customs and environmental authorities be strengthened at the national level to better tackle illegal trade in environmental sensitive commodities?
Thank you for the question. And to respond to that, I'll reflect to participating in the midterm evaluation for Operation Demeter 11. So currently, we're going through Operation Demeter 11, which is another customs administration's operation, which again, as mentioned, which covers the environmentally sensitive products and commodities under the BRS conventions, as well as the Montreal Protocol. And in interacting with some of the customs officers, one of the challenges that was raised is just that. It's on engagement with the environmental entities at the national level, so that one, they are up to speed with what these products and what are the provisions under the different MEAs that they're supporting their countries to implement. And so first, I'll call on the institutionalizing cooperation. And this involves setting up task forces, for example, or committees at the national level, which involve the customs officers as well as the environmental authorities and agencies that are responsible for implementing these MEAs. And so such can be implemented, for example, with MOUs, or Memoranda of Understanding. And this then can outline the clear roles between the customs officers as well as the environmental agencies, and distributing these responsibilities, for example, on licensing or on permit verification, on verification, seizure, storage, and disposal. And through this can also be enhanced with defining and harmonizing the national legislation and licensing and permit systems, which then reflect the obligations of multilateral environmental agreements. Secondly, this can be done through joint risk profiling or intelligence sharing between the different agencies, and it can be set up through various tools on, for example, the data tools or databases, as well as common smuggling routes being shared in these information portals. And there can also be information shared between these agencies on, for example, the known hotspots and other emerging trends that emerge at the national level. In addition, the national governments can set up secure real-time information intelligence sharing platforms, and also conducting these regular interagency meetings and to review cases, for example, or to share experience. And I'll also draw on this joint capacity building at the national level, because while we work at the international level, working with partners, we have worked with countries at the national level holding, say, capacity building events or other meetings and training workshops, where then they have simulation exercises that can bring together the environmental officers, and if in certain countries there's the police officers that also work supporting the customs officers, they can also be brought into such trainings. And countries can also work on providing technical support for sample testing, for example. There's a challenge in a number of countries in terms of lab testing, and so support for countries in setting up such labs for testing some of the products would also be helpful, because then it's challenging, especially when it comes with wastes like chemicals, to identify which substances these are, and then have this testing carried out to then process them in the country level. And lastly, I'll speak about using MEA-driven operations and embedding them into routine enforcement. And this can be, for example, in participating in initiatives like the Operation Demeter. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much for this excellent guidance and for pointing out some of the activities that we could all get involved in to fight this scourge of environmental crime. So thanks to all of you for your presentations and your responses. I think that it's raised a lot of awareness amongst those in the audience, and I wonder, how much time do we still have some time for? We have 5 minutes for some questions from the audience. Is there, yes, please. Do we have a microphone, please? And if you would identify yourself, I know who you are, but if you I prefer that you identify yourself. Here. So hold on just a second. Okay.
I am the coordinator of UNEP Barcelona Convention. We also have a very good compliance committee that has been established now for 15 years. There are many challenges. But my question would be, did you have any opportunity to work together for any a case of potential non-compliance or difficulty in your field of competence? Because I believe that there is room for collaboration. And there is room for enhancing the capacity of the officers who serve the compliance committee. So I would like to know if there is any opportunity, any concrete case for collaboration between different compliance committee at global level. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And to see if anybody from the panel would like to respond. Yes, Haruko, do you have a microphone? Okay, there's one.
Thank you. One of the very recent example is a cooperation between the World Heritage Convention of UNESCO and CITES in Madagascar, where there is actually one rainforest site that has been registered about 10 years ago as the heritage site in danger. I don't know if that's the correct term, but it's the site that is actually a threatened site that has been under review to see if there are improvements that can be made. Otherwise, the World Heritage Site designation may have to be removed. So the World Heritage Convention Secretariat reached out to the CITES Secretariat, and they actually undertook joint support operations for Madagascar, which resulted in a recent site visit done jointly by the two secretariats to determine if the rainforest site is being actually managed wisely. And this was also important for CITES because it was a site where important tree species that are CITES listed had actually been growing, and also Madagascar had been implicated by some other parties as not having compliance with these tree species. And this actually resulted in, first of all, the World Heritage Convention actually removing them from this threatened site designation, followed by, at the recent Standing Committee, Madagascar has now been taken off the trade suspension by the Standing Committee with the legal acquisition findings and the non-detriment findings to follow with the tree species of concern.
Thanks for that question. Just two quick examples on both sides of this. We've had a situation where we were alerted to a CMS party. We had Appendix 1 species, and it was Appendix 2 CITES, and it was being traded to a non-CMS party. And so we immediately reached out to the CITES secretary to discuss what was going on, the data, the trade data, to understand if it was a violation or not. So that's one case. So our first instinct would be to go to our colleagues in CITES. The second was the opposite scenario where a non-party exported a species that was listed on CMS Appendix 1 to a CMS party that brought it in to their country. So again, complex legal issues, and we need to absolutely cooperate to address them.
Any other question? I think we have time for one more. Yes. I think it's working now.
Hi. Hi, Doug Weir, Conflict and Environment Observatory. Thank you very much for the panel. We typically see that periods of armed conflict or political instability weaken environmental governance and compliance with MEAs. And I was just wondering if there are examples from any of the panel of where your MEAs have targeted specific capacity building to states affected by fragility or conflict to help support compliance and address issues around illicit trade.
Anybody would like to take the floor on that one? We have another example. Do you want to? Are you talking about in conflict areas? Is that what you said? Could you just repeat again the last part?
Yeah, so targeted support to countries affected by armed conflict or instability to help support their implementation of obligations under the MEAs.
You mean sorry, I didn't understand the part about the conflict. If you could say that.
So to countries affected by armed conflict, have the MEAs targeted specific capacity building support to the authorities to help them implement their obligations?
Well, normally the parties would be reaching out to us if they would need the support in any area to be able to have better compliance, unless there is a compliance case happening. But of course, we've had, and I think it's probably not, I would not like to mention the countries right now here in public, but we have had some of those who have reached out to us especially when it comes to cross-border trade in endangered species. And so there's been some questions about, for example, under the permitting system of CITES, to ensure that the correct permits were given to be able to transfer that species from one border to another. And that is, they have asked for us to be able to help them with that. And normally what we do is we communicate, we try to ensure that there's communication between the two parties or more parties that are involved, to be able then to have that communication and ensure that the permitting process are correct. As you know, if it's a CITES listed species and it's, for example, often it's Appendix 1, where there can be no commercial trade. It's only maybe for scientific use, for example, for capacity building, for raising awareness in a zoo, for example. That has to have a specific type of permit, and they come to us and ask if we can intervene and speak with the party where there may have been a cross-border when there's been conflict. But I think it's better not to mention names right now, but it has happened and we have given them assistance. Thanks. Are we okay? The time is up. So thank you for the questions. Thank you so much to our panelists. Could we give them a hand, please, for all their participation? I'd like to close the meeting now with inviting my colleague, Ms. Monica Stankiewicz, Executive Secretary of the Minamata Convention on Mercury. And please, if you could welcome her. She's with the Minamata Convention that protects the environment and the lives of millions of people around the world against mercury pollution. Ms. Stankovic has been serving as Executive Secretary of the Minamata Convention since 2020. Before joining the Minamata Convention Secretariat, she was Executive Secretary of the Baltic Marine Environment Protection Commission, or HELCOM, from 2012 to 2019, and prior to this, she worked in the Polish Public Administration's environment sector. Monica, I now hand over the floor to you for the closing of the event. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Yvonne, and to all panelists and speakers. And it's really wonderful to gather here at UNEP, where MEAs have been given such a big prominence, and also at this first MEA side event during the week. This year marks really a busy year for many of us, and it's nearly closing, and many of us have had our COPs with a really concrete results that I can really firmly say we have delivered. And when I say deliver, meaning really improvements of people's life everywhere. And what I would like to say is that synergies work best when we focus on concrete issues, and the trade control and illegal trade is such a concrete issues where many of us have a common interest to collaborate. I would like to start by thanking UNEP for convening us within the Green Customs initiative, where we have all MEAs with trade-related control measures, but also our big partners, Interpol, the World Customs Organization, and UN Office on Drugs and Crime. This is really an example of synergies that have been ongoing for many years, and we still need it. I'm really inspired by all the work done by MEAs. Many of you have decades of experience behind you, so definitely for Minamata Convention we are looking forward to utilizing this experience. And as many of MEAs also, we have Implementation Compliance Committee. And just to briefly maybe tell you, it is maybe similar to the Basel Convention Compliance Committee, where we have where the committee considers systematic issues of implementation compliance, mostly based on the rich data we receive from parties on their national implementation of the convention, but there are also individual issues of implementation compliance, which are based on submission by parties on their self-compliance with the provisions of the convention. And from a meeting to meeting, this body has really gained strength and has become an agenda-setting body for the COP. And thanks to its recommendations, illegal trade, which is also like in Montreal, not clearly identified or defined in the convention, has really gained momentum and has become part of the COP consideration. Another example is the improvement in the reporting system based on the recommendation of that body, or our specific international program, which is a funding mechanism. Also when selecting projects for funding, they look into the outcomes of these body considerations. And we have heard today many practical issues and issues that are really across, such as the matters related to enforcement and collaboration. I will not repeat here, would only say that really in the Minamata Convention we need to draw on experiences, and we can see a similar pattern. The more we regulate, the more illegal trade takes place, and this is exactly what's happening also with mercury. And mercury smuggling has become an issue for the convention and for the world and for people's well-being, and has also been recognized as an issue by our recent COP, that it can undermine really the effectiveness of the convention. And much of the illegal mercury flows into artisanal and small-scale gold mining, causing really a human and environmental crisis in some 80 countries around the world. So this is a matter really of priority to our parties. And to give you an example of recent decision in this regard is to a new mandate to develop strategies in cooperation with organizations I have mentioned and others, MEAs and other MEAs, to address illegal supply and trade of mercury, to assess the reasons behind parties facing challenges in tackling illegal trade, but also to initiate the work to potentially restrict the trade of mercury compounds under our convention, and of course to continue collaboration with implementation compliance bodies of other MEAs. So decades of your experience will really speed up our work. So thank you so much, and thank you to all the speakers, participants, and I wish you a good and interesting rest of the day. Thank you so much.